For many years, I used to read the model railway, model railroad magazines and was always very impressed by the standard of the layouts on display inside these magazines. The artistry, the technical ability, the quality of the rolling stock and scenery, I always found very inspirational. But it also seemed well out of my reach of being able to attain this, not only in terms of skills, I knew I could get so far, but also in terms of the cost and the commitment needed to make a layout that you would often see featured as the layout of the month or so on in various magazines. When YouTube came along, it liberated the model train enthusiast from the culture of perfection that existed within the magazines. Now, I know the magazines played a huge part in the development of the hobby over the decades in terms of creating standards and setting a bar for people to build their own layouts to and go up from the train set or the more primitive models that were available, say, after World War II. And we do have a great debt that we owe to the modeling publishing industry for this. At the same time, they are commercial businesses, these magazines, and they have to play along with the producers and manufacturers, and that's not a bad thing at all. That's just how it is. But whenever I tried to build a layout, I was always left frustrated that they never seemed as perfect as the ones in the magazines. And then I think a certain elitism started to become manifest in my own consciousness regarding these train magazines. That you needed to be a top-end modeler or have a lot of money to build these spectacular layouts that were featured in these magazines. And this led to a kind of frustration, and I often wonder how many people left the hobby because of this. When YouTube came along, it actually liberated the model train enthusiast. Suddenly, there were these layouts that were not perfect. And there was one exception to this. There was a magazine published in England by a man called Chris Ellis called Model Trains International. I think it was called Scale Model Trains before that, and originally came out of the old Airfix Model Train magazine franchise. But by the time he got to reimagine the publication as Model Trains International, there was a wonderful philosophy in it, in that he said that basically when you strip away everything, a lot of railways and railroads around the world are really not very different, especially the ones from a certain time frame, from the 1950s to the 1980s, which is the periods I model. And if you build a layout that could be plausibly set in, say, the Northern Hemisphere, say somewhere like Europe, North America, Canada, USA, etc., you could run all the British 00 and European and American HO stock on that track. And that's what I've tried to do with my layout. I found that magazine, Model Trains International, the one exception to this sense of elitism and proficiency that you found in all the others. It wasn't necessarily selling products on behalf of the major manufacturers. YouTube changed everything. It liberated the model train fan. It gave us back the hobby. It gave us back the pleasure of running trains. It expanded an interest. I often found there was a tremendous myopia within many people in terms of prototype modeling, that they may fall so deeply into modeling a certain branch line in Wales or a particular section of track in the American West or whatever in Germany, France, and so on, that their view of world trains and the modeling hobby industry became very myopic. I can remember distinctly one person I knew that built a phenomenal Irish layout that was perfect, and they didn't even know anything about American trains in terms of things like how they use knuckle couplers and they don't have buffers on their trains, and even the understanding of how the rail system in America and Canada worked. And I often found this kind of sad because they stare into a kind of black hole of perfection, and do they really enjoy the hobby? It also puts them under tremendous pressure to have these layouts and these models perfectly done. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for perfectionists. I'm not saying there's no place for that. But in terms of the overall modeling world out there, how many of them are there really? For instance, I go on groups on Facebook and I see thousands of adults who love Tyco model trains. Now, these wouldn't even be featured in the popular model press, and yet they build lovely layouts. They fix and clean and repair the models of their childhood, and I have a few of these myself, and they get tremendous pleasure from them. And why not? Would you ever see that on the cover of Model Railroader or any of the other major American magazines? Of course you wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. And the same thing in the UK. There are groups dedicated to people who collect Triang and old Hornby stuff and do the same thing. Would that ever be featured within the big model train magazines in the UK? Not a chance in hell. It's all about the latest product and the latest perfection. And I think that has damaged the hobby to a degree. It's created a level of haves and have-nots. And it's also not reflective. And this is going by YouTube, and you look at the colossal numbers of hits that many of these channels get, that people want the trains they love, and they're not necessarily prototype fixed or want perfect scenery or want every single detail on locomotives. In fact, I'm very cynical of this thing of having detail on pieces of rolling stock that basically will fall off and break when you pick them up, or underneath the train or inside it, and you can't see through the windows properly or at it. It just gives the manufacturers an opportunity to charge colossal amounts of money for something that's very delicate. Yes, they're beautiful. Yes, the quality is superb. But a model train piece of rolling stock running around on a layout is more valuable and worth 1,000 times more than one stored away in a box or displayed in a museum cabinet. And that's apparent when you look at the groups of people who create, like Tyco in the USA, or Athean Blue Box, or in the UK, Triang and Hornby. You can actually see the love and enjoyment and pleasure that these people get from their hobby. They're really happy. And it's a very different atmosphere than the often stuffiness you get with the perfect prototype modeler. And I'm not putting down people like that. There's some fantastic channels out there that do this stuff. But as I've seen from watching YouTube videos, YouTube has liberated the hobby from the elitism of the magazine and given it true magazines and publications and even the exhibition layouts, and given a true and sincere and much more healthy, happy and positive outlook for the hobby. And that's really can be seen by the amount of young people who make YouTube videos on their model trains or their model layouts. But you go to model train exhibitions or clubs and you rarely see anybody under 40. And yet there's plenty of them on YouTube making videos about their hobby. And that's an important distinction. For years I've been hearing that the hobby is dying. No, the hobby isn't dying. The hobby was intimidating and pricing out young people. And through things like eBay, they managed to find a way back into the hobby for themselves that would never make it to the cover of a magazine, would never be featured in a magazine, but they are the heart and soul of this hobby, and it bodes well for the future. So you hear a lot of bad things about YouTube, about censorship and so on, but one thing YouTube deserves tremendous credit for is saving this hobby from elitism and giving it back to the real and the most popular demographic of model train fans. Thank you. Please subscribe and have a nice day.